Hello and welcome back to the International PHP Conference 2021. My name is Jan Bernecke from the editorial team, and with me is our speaker, Carsten Windler. Hi, Carsten, nice to have you with us.
Thank you.
You will talk about frameworks in the upcoming session. Very interesting topic. I hope you will all enjoy the session, and you may have heard this one before, but we are very happy if you use the chat for all your questions, and Carsten will be very happy to answer them at the end of this talk. And also, if you are facing any technical difficulties, please reach out via the chat to us so we can help you out. And saying this, I hand over to you, Carsten, and enjoy the talk.
Thank you. All right, guys, then let me share my screen quickly. You should now be able to see my presentation. All right, yes. So here we go. So my name is Carsten. I'm the head of development at KW Commerce. And today I would like to speak about Frameworkless. What does it mean? Basically, you will definitely learn throughout the session. But it's basically about writing PHP applications without the use of frameworks, as the name implies, I guess. Let me show you quickly the agenda for today. Firstly, I will walk you through a very brief history of PHP frameworks. Then we will talk about the good things, the bad things, and maybe also the ugly things from frameworks. I will give you an example of a frameworkless application, very small example. And yeah, then we will hopefully come to a conclusion. Yeah, let's see. So guys, let's start with the brief history. From me, I started with PHP 3 back in 2005 or so. So it was a while. And back in the days, we didn't have much. We didn't have any best practices, really. No code styling, no dependency management, no unit tests. I guess we had them, but we never used them. No Stack Overflow. I have no idea how we managed to do anything back in the days. And also, of course, no fancy MacBooks. Because of that, I think the importance of frameworks in the PHP history is not to be underestimated. So when we start in the year 2000, according to my research, it was the Hort and the Pair libraries, not really frameworks, but libraries at that time. Then we started 2005 with Cake PHP and Symfony, and I was actually quite surprised to see how long Cake PHP is around. So also quite an old one. 2006, then Framework 1. This was my first framework I used, CodeIgniter. Yi 1 in 2008. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly. Forgive me if I don't. In year 2010, the second version of Zen framework came around, which was basically more or less a rewrite. Symfony 2, the Slim is the first microservice framework, which I remember to have seen. And in 2011, finally, Laravel entered the stage, so to say. So quite late, actually. But of course, we all know the success story of Laravel. In 2014, Silex, the microservice framework of Symfony, entered the stage, and the second version of Yi, which was again a complete rewrite. And yeah, so quite recently, I think I don't really need to repeat that really. 2019, for example, Cake PHP 4 came out, Symfony 5. And maybe one interesting thing is the Laminas framework, which actually was Zend framework 3, but because of some complications, the company who bought Zend was no longer willing to support that framework. So the Linux Foundation took over and they renamed it to Laminas. Maybe also some important things alongside the history. We had PSR 0, the first standard recommendation of the PHP framework interoperationality group coming up. And together with Composer, I think these two things were one of the most important happenings in the PHP history, at least for me. And yeah, of course, I not forget that 2008 finally Stack Overflow was launched, so we could finally program. All right, I promised you it won't be that long, so let's have a look at the good things, the bad things, and also ugly things. For me, looking back in my history, working with a lot of frameworks in the past, I think, especially in the beginning, the most important stuff which frameworks gave us were, they gave us some sort of architecture. So we could finally, have some structure in our code. Also using standards, like coding standards, so that finally we had some, common ground to work on, right? We had it also had some educational aspect. So for me, for example, back in the day, I never really studied programming. So I just, PHP developer, how can I say, just started with it. And with then Framework 1, I learned quite some cool lessons, the MVC and decorator patterns and stuff like that. Never heard before of that. I think also the security aspect is very important. PHP itself, of course, is not really security out of the box. So the frameworks really helped us more and more developing secure applications. I think it also, back in the days, it was more also acting kind of like a library. So there was, in the beginning, there was no real dependency management. So we had to get our code from somewhere, and using the framework packages was, of course, a nice thing. Community is also what I consider to be very important. Attending some conferences and reading books about the framework you use. This kind of gave a really cool feeling about the community, and this was definitely helpful. And last but not least, the development speed, right? So with frameworks, you can develop quite fast. So if everything is so nice, why have I named my talk Frameworkless, right? I mean, there must be a reason for that. For that, I would like to show you something. Let's go back a couple of years with the Send Framework 1 project. This is not the actual code. It's unfortunately, I haven't found the code anymore, but this is an example of Send Framework 1 code. And what was it all about? It was our first, in the agency I worked back in the days, it was our first MVC framework, which we used. So completely before that, everything was basically put in files together. Now we separate the view and controller and whatnot. But it was kind of magic everywhere, because this Zen Framework 1 was based on the convention over configuration approach, saying that when you name the stuff right and you put it in the right folders, basically it works. Sometimes you never really know how and what and why, but it worked. There was also this registry pattern, which was actually, if you know the registry pattern, it's extended singleton pattern, more or less. So you were basically able to access all objects you needed at every point in the application, which was super handy. Of course, we did not write any tests. I don't need to mention that, I guess. And we were developing super fast. So we were writing code like hell, copy paste, stuff like that, until the day when Zen Framework 2 came around the corner. And as I mentioned already in the history, Zen Framework 2 was a complete rewrite. And of course, the guys from Zen Framework, they also learned their lessons, right? They learned that this magic anywhere approach was not really paying off. And also the registry pattern was not the best idea. So this is how we ended up, right? Our project, basically Zen Framework 1, based on Zen Framework 1. Not really seeing any future for that one, but it was in production. It was basically very successful. It was serving hundreds of customers at that point. So quite sad. Some other examples, maybe I worked in a company where the main application, the system as a service, and the whole application which paid the company was based on G1. And they desperately tried to migrate to G2 for a couple of years. I don't know the actual status. Might be that they already heard that the upcoming G3 version will also be a complete rewrite. So probably, I don't know. Poor guys, I haven't talked to them for a while. There was also a project based on Laravel 4. Actually, people wanted to do it right, but of course, some things went wrong again. And also migrating to Laravel 5 was not an option, because it was just too much to do at the same point. Also, I heard from a company just recently, big in Berlin, big electronic sales company, which is still working on Zen Framework 1 until today. So imagine finding developers for that. Who wants to work on Zen Framework 1 today? I don't know. Silex was discontinued in 2018. So if you based your code on that framework, oops. I mean, there's a migration path to Symfony, I guess. But I think, since there are a couple of Silex forks still alive, I guess this tells the story as well. And as I said, Zen Framework 3 at some point, until it was taken over by the Linux Foundation, it was at risk. So you never know if this would have been continued. So what yeah, before I go to the next, of course, we also did stuff wrong, right? Completely. So we used the framework wrong. We had this thick model, thick controller, thick views, thick everything approach. It was bad. I have to admit that. One of the biggest mistakes we did, of course, was not to separate the business logic from the framework code. Yeah, so this kind of working framework agnostic, never really did that. And because the updates of the framework usually broke stuff, we had no tests. So it was common practice not to update so frequently because, yeah, we have to deliver features and not invest another sprint in updating the software. Again, also this no tests, I like to mention this a lot because it's super important. Without tests, migration is always super complicated. So in the end, we completely ignored the technical debt. This was one big mistake. So now you could say, okay, right, guys, it was your mistake. It's not the frameworks to blame. So being a head of development, I also have to do a lot with hiring. And one question I like to ask applicants is just, can you please send me an example of the best code you have? What's code you are really proud of course, if they are allowed to share it. So this is very important. I think I can see a lot from that. And I usually tend to look at the controllers. And when somebody sends me a controller and I see that piece of code, then yeah, for me, it is like this pattern of accessing the database directly in a controller is actually a no-go, unless, yeah, we are looking maybe for junior or mid-level. But for more experienced guys, this is actually a no-go. But I was surprised how often I still see that until today. And then I was checking out the Laravel homepage, and still in version 8 of Laravel, this pattern is promoted on the website. And I was like, oh, okay, this is for me, that's not good. I mean, I'm not sure. I don't have enough time to really elaborate on this topic, but for me, it's important to point out that if you are using these kind of database direct transactions in your business logic, it works pretty fast. It works really, of course, you can put this basically anywhere in your code. But the only thing that speeds it up is basically that, for example, this here where you directly check the name, where you want to receive the name. This is and this is actually, again, actual code from the Laravel homepage, right? So this is the only thing which you do is that you speed up shoveling your grave. Because in the long run, when you continue doing that, a real life example probably was that also one company which, yeah, the product was going well, we were scaling up, and the database was becoming more or less the bottleneck. So what do you do? Of course, you separate, you put down your monolith into smaller services. So why not extract the user service, or why not extract the user part of it, put it into a microservice? Well, sounds like a nice idea until we, deep dived into the code, and we found exactly, it was a different framework, but it was the same pattern. We found exactly that pattern everywhere around the code. The users table was directly accessed in this kind of manner. So you could not just replace it with, let's say we have put this into a repository in before. It would have been much more easier to replace that. But with that approach, you're basically stuck to the database forever, unless you want to invest a lot of time refactoring it. So do we always need to use a framework? I think kind of ironic question at this point. Let me give you an example. And this is now, of course, it's example is a microservice. Isn't microservice a bit boring example? Yes, of course. But on the other hand, I only have roughly 30 minutes, and I'm already a bit late, I see, on my watch. So let's have a look. What do we have here? This is just a simple idea of a microservice. We have the HTTP request going in, the router, maybe with some authentication, taking care of it, dispatching it to the right controller. I called it controller here. Basically, this is where your business logic is located. Then, of course, we have the data source, could be a database, could be something else. And you would like to do some logging or monitoring, I guess. And then, once you're done, send back the response. So let's have a look. How could we do that? How can we do that without a framework? So let's start with the database connection. Pretty simple, right? This is how you do a database connection without any framework, just PDO, getting the environmental variables from the Docker Compose file, from the Docker environment, and then you're good to go. So no brainer here, I guess. The router, which I am using here, I found that on Stack Overflow, of course, like after 5 minutes of search. This is actually I like this little function quite a lot. It's basically a router in one function, and it works. Maybe, yeah, I haven't tested it to all extent, but it's a pretty simple thing. I will share the code with you. I can share you the link to my repository I set up for this talk. So if you don't get it now, you can have a look at it later if you want. Here are the controllers, just some of them. And I don't know, unfortunately, I cannot see you guys now, but I imagine some of you cringing or even screaming when you see that kind of stuff. Yeah, I know it's not nice, but really this is an example, a bit exaggerating here. So please bear with me. This is not how I would say should be production ready code. It's more an example. Yeah, this is basically how we use this little router function, passing some configuration array to it. This looks pretty much like in Framework, I guess, already, right? This is pretty straightforward. The method, the URL, the callback, that's it. The result is a match, or if we don't have a match, I have this very cool for response here. Otherwise, we just execute the callback, get the response from the controller, send it back as JSON, and we're good to go. So basically, unfortunately, you cannot see it. It's like one tiny microservice in 100 lines or so. Could be even less if you would take away all the comments. But again, this is more an example. I wouldn't recommend you to use this in production or to say this is the way we should program in the future. It's just the complete opposite of a framework. So let's do some unfair comparison. My little Frameworkless example with all the make files I have, some Composer stuff, Docker Compose stuff, etc. It's like 30 files more or less, 50 kilobytes, and the response time on my local machine is 15 milliseconds. Just local Docker. Versus Lumen. I chose Lumen because it's the microservice framework from Laravel, so it's specialized for microservices. When you install it, it comes with above 6,000 files, 31 megabytes, and the response time is 65 milliseconds on the same machine, same setup. Okay, so you see there is some overhead, some significant overhead which a framework produces. And I know it's unfair. I called it unfair comparison because Lumen offers much more functionality than my little framework here, my little web service. Okay, then let's have a look. How can we improve that little web service so that we can make it better, so that we can offer more functionality that also Lumen would offer us? And for that, I mean, it would be nice, would be cool if we could just use some existing packages, put them together in a nice way and following some standards and rules. I think this is quite beneficial. And luckily we do have that. Of course, we do have Composer. I mentioned that. For me, one of the most important things happening in a PHP history. We have packages where we can download all the cool packages, and we have the PHP FIG, which is giving us a lot of standards which we can use so that we can interchange the packages which we use here very easily if they are according to the standards. I know this the FIG is not, there are controversies around it. I mean, Symfony left it, Laravel left it, I guess for some good reason, because basically, renders the framework obsolete, but that's just my impression of it. Okay, let's see, what can we do here? Let's say version 2. What can we replace with nice packages? First of all, of course, we use Composer, which is PSR4, the actual autoloading standard we use for HTTP. I'm using actually a framework, the component from Laminas Diactoros. Weird name, but that's how it is. The cool thing about Laminas is the same for Symfony, that you can use the components without the framework. And since this is quite a nice component here, I use it a lot. It's according to PSR 7, so it interacts nicely with the router. I also like to use PHP Leak a lot. They have, I think, very good packages, very lightweight, fast, and still quite established packages. And the route package which I'm using here is also capable, of course, using PSR 15, which is the standard for the authentication layer, for middlewares, I'm sorry, which you can use for authentication. You will see this in a bit later. For the database connection, I'm using Doctrine, but not the ORM, but of course the database abstraction layer. I think it's a good idea to use that kind of thing for accessing the database still. And to glue it all together, I'm using dependency injection here. The PHP Leak container package is also quite nice, accords to the PSR 11. So it's also, based on standards, right? I'm not showing you the code now because basically that doesn't make much sense. It's more or less a little bit of glue code, which I have here. Again, you will be able to access the repository right after the talk. And there you can see it in its whole beauty. I have a branch for every version I have here. Microservice version 3. So what can we improve here still? What else is there? Of course, the middlewares, I already said, I'm using this PSR 15 middlewares package, which is using basic authentication because, it's the simplest example. For logging, and I use Monolog, of course. Is there any other package around? I don't really know. It's maybe, but it's the best one, I guess. It's also used in other frameworks, so this can't be wrong. Still, it's based on PSR 3, so it could be replaced easily if at some point it is no longer maintained, which I don't think will happen, but could be. And for code quality, of course, we can use checkers. If I formatted it according to PSR 12, we can add any other checkers. This is really not a big deal. PHP Stan, Psalm, Code Sniffer, whatever. It's easy to edit. You will see it in the examples. All right, adding this, I added quite a lot of functionality already. I hope this comparison, which I know is a bit more fair. The Frameworkless V3 version has now already, gained a lot of files, right? The vendor folder is quite heavy. Yeah, that's how it works. We are now at 20 megabytes, and the response time was 35 or 40 milliseconds. Still, there's a difference between those two. So I don't know what you would like to add to a microservice. Let's see what else can we do. We could, for example, for testing, I mean, this is a no-brainer. You can also use, I don't know, Codeception, or if you just want to do some end-to-end testing, use Cypress, which is quite nice. So this is also, it's easily to be integrated also without a framework. If you need templates for any reason, the plates is also for a nice package from the PHP Leak, or use Twig from Symfony. If you want to use the file system, I can only recommend using the Fly system, because then once you have separated it, it's abstracted for once and then for all times. And then you can, if you later scale up and you want to change your file system to S3 or whatnot, then it's just a matter of configuration. The events package following PSR 14. Today, Larry was talking about it, I guess. Unfortunately, I haven't seen the talk yet, but I definitely will. So also PSR 14, very important standard, because then you can send events even across applications, which is really, really cool when you come to a bigger setup. If you want to use a queue, SQS, for example, you can use the Bernard package. This is also very quickly added, so no big deal. PSR 6 gives us the Symfony cache. Also written, I think this PSR 6 was also by Larry, driven by Larry a lot. I'm using here Symfony cache as an example. Basically, you can choose every caching package which you like. How about MVC? This is where I would say, no, don't go that way with Frameworkless. There it gets complicated. I mean, it's possible. You can adjust the router package to deliver all kinds of content, but I think especially when we come to forms, things will get will get dirty, will get complicated because all the form sanitization, all this kind of security. There I would also rely rather on a framework. But for all the other stuff, might be considering not to use a framework, because I don't know what's missing. Maybe you can tell me afterwards in the comments. So let's go with some conclusion. Something speaking against frameworkless code from my perspective is that it requires more knowledge inside the team. For those guys who are writing the code, you have to have a bit more skilled developers maybe than, because you have to have a lot of background knowledge, and you cannot just use the framework out of the box, which is, of course, that's a nice thing to do. You have to really take care to do the manual updates of all the packages. You don't have any major version of a framework which you have to update. You now have to check all the packages themselves. Of course, Composer can help you. There's a function you could Composer outdated, I think you can integrate it in your continuous integration to throw some warnings if there are outdated packages. And of course, you will have the situation that the package also has breaking changes. This will happen. Well, this happened in the past, at least. Also, major versions are always painful. But I think if you use these kind of standards like PSR, the effect is much less. So the danger is much less. And you have to write some glue code, as you can see in the example or in the repository afterwards. It's not that much, actually. It's a bit of setting up all the packages, but in the end, it's not really a lot of code which you have to write, putting the pieces together. So I think it's more like, it's even a bit fun. I don't know. For me, it was setting up this little example application was quite fun. The pros from my kind of view. So I call it the fear of major update. So whenever, I remember this, whenever there was a major update of our framework, which we used, and there's, okay, let's have a look at the breaking changes. What will go wrong? Let's see. And then, when you updated the package, the framework, and then you were basically bug hunting. As I said, this can also happen for packages, but I think the risk is a bit lower there. The other pro is that you have a much better understanding of actually what happens inside of the application, underneath the framework layer, because all the internals. I think this is quite interesting. Of course, if you need to write an application fast, you shouldn't worry about that. But to get this understanding of code, of their own code, and how PHP works more on a basic level is also quite nice. It's lightweight, definitely. I think that's because we only add the stuff which we really need, and we don't. And frameworks are always trying to be a solution for many problems and not just for one problem, of course. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so successful. But that, of course, comes also with a price. And we can choose our own patterns. As I said, this registry pattern, for example, if we don't want to use it, or the facade pattern, we can more easily control which patterns we are using here, because it's not promoted by some framework to use what I consider an anti-pattern all over in your code. One important thing, security. I just watched the interesting talk from Stephen this morning about how to hack Laravel, and it was quite cool to see. Of course, frameworks give you a lot of security, but still you have it's no protection for you, right? When you do it wrong, you can introduce security holes. If you don't patch fast enough, you have vulnerabilities open. So I think once you have an application which is scaling and where you earn money with, you will not get around hiring pen testers, maybe doing some automated pen testing, use tools which scan your code for vulnerabilities like SQL injections. So no matter what, if you have an application based on a framework, or if you have an application based not on a framework, you definitely need that at some point if you want to keep your user data secure. So of course, I think it's especially when we come to handling forms, as I said, then I think frameworks are to be preferred. So what's the perfect solution here? Of course, there is no perfect solution. As I said, there's not one hammer for every nail. So just choose wisely what you would like to do. If you would like still to go with frameworks, or if you say, maybe next time a little application we could try it without. Maybe let me give you some help here. And if you're an old guy like me, then maybe you now have this tune inside your head, with or without you. I'm not singing it, but anyway, I'm drifting. So when you want to use a framework, maybe I would say I hope that doesn't sound arrogant, but for startups it's perfect, I think, still, because unless you have a big founding and a big load of developers, you want to go fast. You have to deliver functionality to beat your competitor and to be fast on the market, deliver features to establish your user base. This going into technical depth is, I think it's almost not to be avoided. If you want to build a MVP, a minimum viable product, could also be helpful. Just some quick test application. Yeah, let's say you want to build a test. Is it accepted by the user base? If yes, cool, then let's probably refactor it or put it on a other foundation. But if you just want to go with a quick test, it's perfect. If you want to build a monolith, I mean, monolith for me is not per se a bad thing. If you want to build a UI-heavy application with, I don't know, this typical admin area with a lot of tables and stuff, perfect, go with it. If you have some sort of user login section, again, this is, I think, also because of the security aspects, that's quite useful. But if you do so, I would really recommend really follow the framework rules very strictly, because you will then reduce the risk of the migration problems. To do that, set up code guidelines really, and do code reviews. Of course, code reviews you should do anyway, but also with a focus on, are we using the framework correctly, or are we trying to sneak around our own code guidelines? Try to program framework agnostic if you can. So put your business logic, wrap it maybe like use a repository instead of accessing the database directly. I mean, this is a common pattern, but still, as I demonstrated, it's not yet there for everybody. Update your framework fast, because when you spend too much time, I don't know, waiting a couple of major versions until you update the framework, this will increase the pain and will make stuff not easier for you. And take care that you tackle the technical debt, which you will pile up in the beginning by talking to your boss and say, look, we are going fast now, but afterwards we really need some time to put it in better shape. Otherwise, as I gave you the example of the user service, this was really a problem for that company, having that sort of code. Frameworkless, if the company is already a bit grown up, saying that you have already reached a decent user base, and now it's also time to make stuff a bit proper, and then you can go maybe with Frameworkless, if you have, of course, the skilled people for that. If you want to go microservice architecture, why not? As I demonstrated, it's quite easy to set up such a service. If you have, for example, internal services where you don't have not outside facing, here at KW Commerce, we have a lot of internal services which are doing calculations. There, actually, the benefit of a framework is, for me, not given really. Of course, update your packages regularly. You could also use the basic skeleton, which I sometimes call the frameworkless framework. It's of course not a framework, but it should be, maybe if you want to go microservice, then you have one basic skeleton which you can use, so that you don't have to program everything from scratch again. But it shouldn't go into some sort of internal framework, of course. Do the documentation properly. Document a lot, because you don't have the framework documentation anymore. You have to do it yourself. Here again, set your own guidelines how to use that, and take care that they are used doing reviews, and try to use, you can also go package agnostic, right? So if you also, your business logic should not be, there should not be too much connections to the packages. Good example for me is always Carbon, this datetime library. If you want to use that, I would recommend not to, just wrap it in some other class and use this then instead. Okay, guys, time is over. I'm a bit over, but I hope that's okay. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for being here. If you have any questions, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, most preferably. Would be nice. I know this is a bit controversial topic, and I don't want to say that I have the conclusion for all the problems, but I'm happy to discuss this later on, or now if you have any questions. So thanks.
And many thanks to you, Carsten, for your interesting insights. for now, we don't have any questions in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I guess everything was explained perfectly. Let's put it this way. And as you just said, if there are any questions coming up later on, just get in contact with Carsten on social media. He will be happy to answer your questions.
Exactly.
And saying this, again, thank you, Carsten, and for all our attendees, many thanks for your patience and for staying with us, and see you in one of the next sessions. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.